Oh, look at that. And that's actually how they're going to present also. Does this change the slides? Thank you. And a laser pointer. Excellent. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Joe Doyle. I'm the Undergraduate Research Coordinator here at WNMU, and I'd like to welcome you to the third installment of the Science Speaker Series, Women in Research. We're going to have 3 WNMU faculty members, Dr. Illya Medina, Professor of Chemistry, Department of Natural Sciences, Dr. Jennifer Johnston, Professor of Psychology, Behavioral Sciences, and Dr. Kimberly Petrovic, Associate Dean of the School of Nursing and Kinesiology. They'll be speaking today about their work, their research, and more. Before I go ahead and introduce our first speaker, though, I want to talk about why is WNMU doing this? Why do we promote research? Why are we holding events like this? Well, when a professor or a PI, a researcher, does their research, the benefit of the research goes beyond that professor, beyond their lab, or beyond the manuscript that they produce for their research. When students involved, students also find benefit. Now, what kind of benefits do students find? Well, students are funded, one, but beyond that, they are offered an opportunity to work with peers as well as mentors in a group that is working to answer a question that has a common goal. When a student gets to work in this, they find themselves to be in a community. And when they get comfortable within this community, they find a sense of belonging. It's this sense of belonging that they see themselves as being a participant within their discipline. Besides that though, students also get the opportunity to work hands-on with what they've learned in class. They get to have an experience to really see where they want to set their goals, where they want to go. So these research experiences allow them to hone their experiences and their goals to see whether they want to go in their future, academically and professionally. Additionally, when students are afforded the opportunity to present the research, the student becomes a teacher, a presenter of the research. And in terms of experiences of learning, making a student teach is a high-level learning experience for them. Additionally, when a student is out at a symposium presenting their research, they have the ability to network, to meet people who can open doors, collaborate, and change their life for them, to get them and help them achieve their goals. So what we see is that faculty members as well as students benefit from this research, but it's greater than that because our departments and our campus as a whole benefits from it. So whether it's reputation, whether it's prestige of the research, whether it's receiving funding, whether it's receiving capital equipment and resources that allow for a greater foundation for education and research, also our entire university benefits from this. So this is why we're doing it, because even one professor here on campus doing research and involving students is going to make a difference for our campus. So that's why we're here. So today, what we hope for is something like this, is that one of our students out here who's not participating in research will decide to engage themselves with research that's available here on campus or external to campus. And perhaps even a researcher that's in this crowd, a faculty or staff member, will decide to pursue research that interests them. So that's why we're doing this. So on that note, I would like to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Illya Medina.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to have a few minutes to share what I have been doing this is my 4th semester at Western, and I have some projects going on, so let me just make sure. Oh, I need to go first. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research I have been performing at Western, as well as the one that I performed in the past during my PhD studies. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my research life itself. So I wanted to start talking about how I got interested in research. So that was me in, I guess, 2003. I was an undergraduate student in Mexico, and I was just taking classes, right? And I remember that I heard that if you do research, you get to travel. So that was my motivation at that time. I was like, okay, I want to travel. What do I have to do, right? So I started doing research at that time. I'm a food chemical engineer, so I started doing research with minimal processed foods, and I got the opportunity to attend a conference in the United States, and I also had the opportunity to go to Greece with some colleagues. That was in 2006. So that was my first international conference, and at that time it was the very first time that I had to present in English, so that was a challenge for me. But really, the motivation, the reason why you start, it doesn't matter. At the end, you always get rewarded. So the research that I'm performing right now, I started evaluating implications of nanomaterials in plants. And this is because I was lucky to be selected to participate in a University of California Center for Environmental Implications of Nanotechnology. It was a big multi-institutional grant that my graduate school at UTEP got at that time. So I was funded for that, and I had the opportunity to work with researchers from Rice University, from UTEP, from the UC system in general. So they were studying the implications of nanomaterials at that time. And let me just tell you what a nanomaterial is for those ones that are not too familiar with it. Those are not even ants can see a nanometer. So nanomaterials are chemicals at the end. The only difference is their size. So there's a lot of attention into nanomaterials or nanotechnology recently, and it's because of their properties that are considered to be enhanced with regular size materials. So this is a scale. So if we start with a guitar, right, it's about 1 meter long. We go 10 times smaller, we have a decimeter. And when I prepared this, it was one of those old cell phones, not the new ones, right, that are super big, but we can have an idea what a decimeter is. We go 10 times smaller, we have a dime, which is about, we can say, close to a centimeter. 10 times smaller, we have a millimeter, maybe the width or the thickness of those small ants. If we go 1,000 times smaller, we get into the micrometer range. Most of the chemicals, we're gonna find them in this range, the commercial chemicals, and that's about the size of bacteria. At this point, we already cannot see it with the naked eye, right? And if we go 1,000 times smaller, we get into the nanometer range. We have things such as viruses or DNA, and it's here where now chemists are synthesizing materials in this size, and that's the novelty of nanomaterials, right? It's because of their small size, they are noticed for their enhanced properties. Like we talk about, they have high surface area to volume ratio. They are more reactive because they are so small. They can be used in a lot of cell studies. They have physical, optical, and electrical properties that are used in a lot of applications. So I'll talk about applications in a second. They can also be functionalized in the surface of the material. We can always change the chemistry of it. So that's the beauty of the nanomaterials. That's why now in a lot of products we hear nanotechnology, or it contains nanoparticles, etc. So there, as I said, there's a lot of applications going on right now. The last time that I went to the Home Depot, I remember that I look at a fan and it says it contains nanotechnology so it doesn't accumulate dust. Or like those antibacterial socks or clothes for athletes, those ones contain nanomaterials. So we can find them in aerospace, of course in electronics, a lot. We have quantum dots in there. In medicine for drug delivery, they have a lot of applications. In food, cosmetics, paint. So no matter where we look, there's nanotechnology going on. So last time I checked, this was October last year, and it was reported in the US that we have 1,833 products that contain nanomaterials that are reported. However, there's no regulation yet. So we estimate that there's way more products out there in the market that contain nanomaterials, and we don't know because manufacturers don't have to release that information. We don't have any regulations at this point. So why do we care if there are chemicals at the end? We'll talk about reactivity. However, these are novel materials, and we don't know what's going to happen at the end, right? They're relatively new. We can talk about maybe they started becoming commercialized maybe in 2000, so it's pretty recent. So, and then we produce a bunch of different materials and a lot of products, but eventually they end up in either landfills, air, water, or soil. So we started being concerned on what were the consequences of the effects or the implications of these materials into our environment. So that's why I started studying implications of these materials, and I started studying zinc oxide nanomaterials specifically. Why those ones? Those ones are used in a lot of cosmetics and medicine, construction, paints, and it's estimated that 34,000 tons, metric tons are produced yearly of this nanomaterial, which represent around 2.4% of the overall zinc oxide production. And most of them are going to go into cosmetics. And when we talk about implications, okay, so I'm gonna use sunscreen, eventually it's gonna wash off, it's gonna go into the water, what happens to the aquatic life, what happens to the soils, ecosystems in general. So when these materials started being commercialized, people started getting concerned, right? And there were even some protests. They say if we have them in cosmetics, they have to be labeled. And at that time, we sort of started seeing new products that stated in their labels that they had zinc nanomaterials. And some studies, this is a long document with a lot of research going on from the European Union. They found some DNA damage in human cells. They found ill effects in rats, liver damage, lung inflammation, mild irritation in rabbits. And this is when they exposed these either cells or animals to zinc oxide nanomaterials. Those were some of the very first reports that we have about toxicity. And of course, well, what happens with the boys list, right? Yeah, we need to also look at those ones because mainly the concern of toxicity comes to humans, right? What's gonna happen to our health. But we also eat plants, right? And we need to know what happens to those ones. So the first studies at the beginning were at very high doses. They started doing like 4,000 milligrams per kilogram, and everyone was so scared. The studies probably 2015, and they say, oh, we're gonna die, we cannot eat this food, what's gonna happen? But they're really looking into very, very high concentrations that were not realistic, and also very short exposure times. So later on, they kept, coming more and more studies on edible plants. We started seeing a shift into, okay, they're not that bad. If we let the plants grow long enough, if we use more realistic concentrations that could end up in the environment, then the plants adjust and they even benefit for it. Because at the end, these are nutrients for the plants. So we have, higher zinc, which is very good because we all need zinc in our diet, increased yield. We have nutrient loading and yield. So in wheat plants, cucumber, tomato. So here's when we started seeing these nanomaterials not as a risk, but an opportunity for agriculture. So I studied implications in bean plants, and I selected bean plants because it's widely cultivated in all over the world. And I wanted to see, okay, well, if we're using nanoparticles all over the world, then maybe these guys over here will get exposed to it. So I'm just gonna summarize very, very briefly what I started doing. I did different experiments. Those ones, I evaluated the effects in plants during 45 days, and then I grew plants to maturity, and I analyzed the actual beans. And then I did a transgenerational study where I grew them for 200 days. So this was my PhD work. And very briefly, I included some pictures in here because I want the students to know that it's actually fun. You know, you spend a lot of time in the lab, but that doesn't mean that you don't enjoy it, right? It's a very good experience. So we started looking at positive things or effects, you know, increased zinc, and there's a zinc deficiency in the population that is reported. So if these plants, if these fruits have more zinc, that's a good thing. So we started looking at negative things of traditional compounds. You know, we noticed that the zinc was being translocated from the soil to the roots, to the stems, to the leaves, and to the fruit, which is the end product that we're gonna eat. So we also, when we analyzed the beans, we observe increased zinc accumulation, which is a good thing to avoid that deficiency. We observed no negative changes in general. It didn't affect yield, it didn't affect protein, which is one of the most important nutrients in beans, right? It's protein at a very low cost. So we noticed a little bit of negative effects of traditional compounds compared to nanomaterials. That's what I noticed during those 5 years of my PhD, and I was, okay, so then we can start looking at this from a different perspective. And so for the transgenerational study, I did not really observe any negative effects except for nickel, which has to be studied a little bit deeper, but the nutritional quality and the yield remained unaffected. So now, if we understand that these materials can be more beneficial than regular materials, then we can start looking at them as a potential application for agriculture, right? And these ones we have, now we call them nano-agrochemicals, right? At the end, they're agrochemicals, pesticides, fertilizers, but in the nano size. So right now, this, look, this is 2020, it's more recent. Now we're looking at nanomaterials as something useful. So we can use nanomaterials for sensors, they use nanosensors, or we wanna look at better quality in our produce. We use them for pest control, disease suppression, or stress tolerance, or for a more efficient use of resources. A lot of the pesticides and fertilizers that we use end up lost to the environment because they are not immediately caught by the plants. So when we have something that is smaller, it's more probable that the plants are gonna take up these nutrients. So therefore, we have less environmental impact. So this is the research that I am doing or starting to do at Western. I think this is the third semester where my very first semester didn't get much done, but we started designing different mesocosms, and we characterize the nanoagrochemicals. We can do that at Western, but we have collaborators at UTEP mainly where they characterize them for them. And then we're gonna apply. So right now we have projects with manganese oxide, zinc oxide, and copper hydroxide materials, and we're growing the plants in very different scenarios. Here's where the students play an important role, because I know a little bit about this part, and this, they become creative. They say, oh, I want to test this, or I want to test that, or I want to try this, right? Depending on what they read once I give them some articles too. And then we're going to try to look at the uptake of an accumulation of these materials, the responses of the plants, of course, and we want to look at the productivity and quality of the produce. So what we have going on right now is we're working with common beans again. I guess that's my expertise in it. And the truth is that it's very easy to grow, and the greenhouse that we have at Natural Sciences it's kind of like a tropical, so not everyone is happy there, especially plants. So those ones grow well, so we stick to those. And this one we are testing just natural soil from New Mexico that one of the students collected from a remote area. And it's an alkaline soil, which is not used in agriculture. So we wanted to see if we can make it feasible to be incorporated in agriculture. We have some pea plants, and that one we're gonna start testing for disease suppression with a fungi, and also jalapeno plants. This is a collaboration with a graduate student at UTEP, and we're trying to use it to fight stress due to additional salt. So there's 3 projects. These projects have all phases. So this is Brenda Dominguez. She's here. She has been working with me since the beginning, and she has. I'm gonna show a couple of her results. She has done a great job. She's graduating, and I'm so sad. I don't know what I'm gonna do. But now I have Bo Maiden. Brenda is a chemistry and cell molecular biology major, and Bo it's a botany major. She's gonna start working with this, and I have Elena. She is just started a couple of months ago. So those are the projects that we have going on right now, and well, what else? So these are some of Brenda's results, and I'm just gonna go quickly over them. We look at, as I said, this is alkaline soil, and it's not only in New Mexico, everywhere in the world we have alkaline soils that cannot be used. And it is estimated by 2050, we're definitely gonna have a shortage in food, right? Because climate change is coming on, or soil is not usable anymore. We can't rely on that, so we need to start looking at different approaches. So Brenda wanted to see, we have zinc oxide compound. She's testing a nano form, a regular size form, and an ionic form, which this is what they use in traditional agriculture. And we have different scenarios that I had some ideas, but then she made it way more complicated. And I said, are you sure you're gonna go through this? And she said, yes, because now I'm curious and I wanna know what happens, right? So she has these scenarios. She's testing these materials, what happens when we only have soil, when we have soil with fertilizer, when we have composting worms, when we have the combinations of all those ones, worms with fertilizer, with a plant with fertilizer, plant with worms and fertilizer. And we're gonna look at the effects and how the soil properties change, and if we can improve the quality of the soil for agriculture. And of course, since we already have plants in there, we're gonna see how the plants are responding to these treatments. So she's doing some column experiments to evaluate the soil interactions with the materials, and that's Brenda over there with her columns. And well, so far we were able to select the soil, and as I said, this is an alkaline soil, so we got several samples. Joe Doyle here helps us to characterize some of this. So we selected this one. It has a high pH. It's a good soil for agriculture in terms of texture, but not because of the pH. And it's also deficient in zinc. So it was perfect for us. It's actually, we collected it by the entrance of Bill Evans Lake, so it's not so far from here. So preliminary results, because we're repeating the experiment one more time just to make sure that it's correct before publishing this. She observed that when we have living organisms like plants and worms, additional to the fertilizer, we observe increases in the zinc in the soil, which means that it's going to be available for the plant. So that's the preliminary results we have so far. And okay, so I think that's pretty much about result stuff, but of course I want to encourage especially students and other faculty members. So undergraduate research has a lot of benefits. So Brenda and I'm tagged to her because she got funding from SRPD, so we were able to attend national conferences, the Sustainable Nanotechnology Conference. She got an award. So she keeps saying that I never thought that I would be at a national conference, presenting with students from fancy universities, from Rice or from, I don't know where else, Baylor, etc. Right? She was there, the Carnegie Mellon. So also to me, well, I never thought that I would one day put a step on UCLA, right? And not only I was there just to take a picture, but I was there to get trained. And this was thanks to my research at that time. my graduate research. So Brenda also, I think she really started liking research. She did a summer program with New Mexico IMBRE, and she was awarded the best undergraduate poster. So also she got a student award at the Sustainable Nanotechnology, and again, she was, I think in the overall conference there were only 2 undergraduate students or 3. She was one of them, and she got an award. And not only that, you know, yeah, definitely she was nervous, she was sweating, and she had to work really hard and don't sleep a few nights before that. But I mean, you get to meet people. It's very cool when you know that you have someone who you can talk to at Harvard or at Rice, and if you need help, you really make friends. So that's another thing that we don't see other than, oh, you just work too much, you don't have a life, right? But, well, you get the perks of it too. I'll be happy to take any questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you mentioned Rice University a couple of times, and Dr. Smalley there got a Nobel Prize for lucky balls and Marvin, and wrote a book about the elevator to the moon and stuff like that. How do you see nanotechnology in future careers for our undergraduate students here?
Actually, you know, I was talking about inorganic students. It's going to be a lot of jobs just related to nanotechnology. And when I read that was like 2 years ago, and it said by 2020, I don't remember the number, maybe 3% of the chemists or related jobs have to have some sort of training with nanotechnology. And the salaries for nanotechnology are a little bit higher than a regular chemist or technician. So it's really, in terms of jobs, definitely it's a go. And of course industry, right? Development and synthesis, because I just purchase nanomaterials and test them. But the development, like a lot of my colleagues, they work at Intel or they work at Apple because they are using them for a lot of electronics. So definitely a lot of jobs there. Anyone else? Yes?
Do you know the range of like 3D printing with the technology we have now?
The range for 3D?
Yeah, the 3D printing.
With nanos? Or
Yeah.
I don't have that answer, so I don't really know much about 3D printing, but I'll be happy to look at it and send you an email with the answer.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes?
We hear a lot about using organic ways of growing as opposed to using pesticides.
Yes.
How does nanotechnology feed into that?
Well, we are not calling them organic, right? Organic is getting rid of pesticides and fertilizers, but at this point there's no way that we can feed the world with organic food. So we have to rely on technology. And nanotechnology, what it's trying to do is having a less environmental impact, and that's where also testing at the same time toxicity to the plant, to the organisms that live in the soil, and of course us humans. But it's a completely different approach. But we are talking about less impact, definitely, than traditional agrochemicals, because even agrochemicals require a lot of water, right? So agriculture requires a lot of water. So with this, we're talking about, well, maybe we need less water, and of course, less chemicals. So that's the approach. Yes. Anyone else?
Just a quick question about the use of pesticides and organophosphates. How do you see zinc as a pesticide replacing, or to what % do you see it replacing typical organophosphates, which are so dangerous because of the impact they can have on people?
We are not looking at zinc as a pesticide. We're using it as a fertilizer. The one that we're using as a pesticide is copper hydroxide, which is currently being used as a fungicide. But yeah, zinc, we are just looking at it as a fertilizer. Anyone else? Yes. No, you're good.
Backwards. How much of the food or how much of that product is being used here locally to grow food for like us? And
We don't
everybody
know
else?
because it's not on the labels yet. So the only one that manufacturers have to release is, stated in the label is silver nanoparticles. But then they found toxicity, so they canceled that, and we cannot use silver nanoparticles anymore. So right now we don't know. But at least copper hydroxide, I've seen a couple of pesticides that have copper hydroxide nanowires, which are the ones that we're going to be testing soon. We don't know. There's really not much information. And as I say, that number that I showed is just an estimate. And whoever says, oh, yeah, I want to say that I have nano because people might think it's cool, but there's people that is afraid, so maybe I'm not going to release that information. So it really depends on the manufacturer. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So while we're setting up, I just want to say to any students out there who saw Brenda's experience, where she was able to go to multiple conferences, to summer research experiences, Brenda's special, but it's not because she's special. This opportunity is available to all of you guys, whether it's research here on campus, getting funding for research here on campus, going off campus during the summer for external research experiences. These are all available to you guys, and I can assist you with any of this if you need. Yes. Yes.
My question is actually for Brenda. Obviously, you're a very exceptional student, but how did you fit additional research into your already heavy science degree?
That was actually the hardest part for me, because I play golf as well, and then I'm in the student government. So like there was nights that I was in the lab till like 10 p.m. on a Friday night, and then all my friends are out partying and having a good time. But like it started as my senior project, and then there was just so much more I could do with it that it just seemed like a waste not to do it. So that's kind of, yeah. Oh, yeah, I do that too.
Thank you, Brenda. Any other questions? All right, well, our next speaker is Dr. Kimberly Petrovic, Associate Dean of the School of Nursing and Kinesiology.
I'm going to put my notes right here. How about that? So first of all, I wanted to say thank you, Ilia, for going first, and that was just a marvelous presentation. So of course I get to follow her. That's how it goes, huh? So also thank you to SONAC for attending, and I appreciate being here, so thank you. Nice to be able to share what we're doing over in SONAC. So this is more about a grant for which we applied, and we will wait to see what happens. But the title of the grant is actually kind of summed up. You can read this, but the idea of transforming southwestern New Mexico's nursing workforce. And what we wanted to do, we created a model called the BEPI model. And so it's easier to say than the Behavioral Health Education and Practice Integration Model. So we call it the BEPI model. I'm sorry, let's see. Good. So there's a book by John C. Maxwell called Teamwork Makes the Dream Work. And I've not read the book, I need to, but I have memorized this phrase, and my colleagues know it. And it's no longer is research. I don't know that it really ever was, but it's not a solo effort. You need each other. You need a team, and a team that you can trust. And we have one. So in SONAC, teamwork makes the dream work. That said, some of our, I'm sorry, give me just, there we are. I was looking for red, here's green for go. So some of our team members, we have Alexis Harsh, she is a doctoral student as well as a nursing professor. You can see all these letters after her name. And as you'll find out after a little while, this NP part stands for a nurse practitioner. We have Dean Foster. He has been part of our team, very important part of it, and I think people know him as Chief Online and Distance Education Officer. We did have people help us along the way. This is our final team, though. We have a grant writer named Chris. She's very well versed in healthcare and nursing, and she has helped us tremendously. And then finally, our team would not be complete without support from Drs. Crocker and Chavez, as well as Cynthia Martinez and Dorina Martinez, who have expertise, quite the expertise with budgets. I took these from the website, so here, in case you wanted to see a picture of someone, here is, so you can see Alexis when she's on campus. This is Alexis, and this is Dean's picture, so he's ever elusive. He'll be around here somewhere. So in this grant that I'm going to talk about, we have the PI versus program directors. So my colleagues are co-PIs. We called ourselves that, and then I would be the program director, or we could. Students don't know what PI means. Oh, okay. So does anybody want to guess what PI means? A student. Oh, yes. You're not front row. So if you are the principal investigator, what might that mean with the principal part? You're, okay, very good. So you're the lead. And so what happens when you're the lead, the charge? The buck stops there, and so with the role comes the responsibility. So yes, and that's another reason why you need your team, and you're all a team. Now from our perspective, one's not better than the other. It's that we work together and somebody needs to take the lead on a particular grant application and hopefully grant. Yes?
People watching on YouTube, so close to the mic.
Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, all right. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm sorry about that. So one of the I tend not to talk in abbreviations, but we call this the HERSA. And the reason it's called that, you can see right here, oops, I'm sorry, the Health Resources and Services Administration, and how this is tied to nursing. So HERSA likes to fund healthcare projects, and with nursing being what it is, we thought we could go for this. And again, we had help along the way, but the final team made these decisions. Okay, so I've said sometimes that with grant writing, you gotta play to win. Because if you think, well, this is too much work, there may not be any reward for this, we might not get the grant. Well, you won't. So congratulations, you are correct. But if you want to have a chance, you've got to be in the game. You've got to play to win. I wanted people to see for those who are not familiar with what something like this looks like, this is the front page of this. And you can see a few little highlights here. I'm sorry, let me just. A few little highlights here that we have approximately 2 months turnaround. Now, yes, that's not a lot of time. And so sometimes we think, oh, you know, I can do it tomorrow. There's lots of time. Oh, things happen. And the sooner you can get it done, the better. And I admire people who can work the day before or the night of or the night before, but it's not a smart idea when it comes to something like this. So with this particular opportunity, it's not really an RFP. And does anybody know what an RFP is? Okay, that's a request for a proposal, and oftentimes that is your strict research grant. And this is actually called, and I'm not sure what I think about this term, a NOFO. This is a Notice of Funding Opportunity. So that's the word, the abbreviation as well, so the NOFO. And this in particular, I didn't want to go through all 50-some pages of the NOFO, but one of the foci of this is rural and underserved areas in healthcare. So I think we fit that description. Another page from the 56 of the application is the important details. So when you're going through something like this, look at this page. And we had, from our team, we had a lot of help with this. Chris in particular was able to make an outline for us, not with just with this, but the other 55 pages, and help us to stay on track. So you can see this is up to $500,000 per year, but you can also see up here this little proviso that says the program could be canceled. So at least we're playing to win. So we can build on this nonetheless. So a lot of people know, a lot of those who've done research know, give them what they want. This is not the time to expand upon, other things. What they are looking for is all of this. So if they want A, you give them A, and just go step by step through this. Now, a lot of us know what grants.gov is, but let me just see if this will show. Oh, maybe so. I know it doesn't always. Okay. Or not. That's okay. So, nonetheless, pause, talk amongst yourselves. All right, well. Okay, well, that's for that presentation. I'm sorry. May I have, yes, thank you very much. So how's everyone doing? Yes, we need some music. Does anybody play? Oh, we have an instrument?
I heard we have a cellist.
Oh, okay, you know. Well, this is grants.gov for those who are interested. Is there any way to make that smaller? I know sometimes with these. Now to get okay, thank you very much. So we've seen grants.gov. Thank you very much. It always happens. I should learn. So again, step by step, and what's nice about this is they spell it out. Very prescriptive, one after the other. Do it this way, just like a prescription. Take it this many times with water. Okay, so the financial requests here. You can see if it's $500,000 a year times 3 at the max, then that's $1.5 million. And here we did not necessarily mean to, but we cut it pretty close. You see right up there. It doesn't hurt to ask. And so for someone like myself, I am concerned about the narrative, explaining the ideas, synthesizing the information, why is this, etc. But in reality, a lot of times people are going to go and look right at that budget because it's money, and it needs to be spent properly and accordingly. Before I go into this, and other than nursing, can anybody tell me why we are starting to use the term behavioral health? Not everywhere, but behavioral health as opposed to mental or psychiatric health, other than nursing. Okay, so stigma, very good, yes. And what might follow? How would you know somebody's stigmatized if they didn't tell you? Well, let me. Okay, so, and why is that? Yes. So the stigma, because you're seeing these behaviors. We can't, not yet, not that I know of, read someone's mind. We don't know what their state is, but we can see their behaviors. And that's not saying we don't have quirks and idiosyncrasies, because some of us have a few. But when you see certain behaviors, then you can think, what would a rational person do? And we all have a bad day or a year or whatever, but what would a rational person do? Ooh, so, not trip on the microphone. So, here we have, again, this is not across the board. You'll still see people or read things saying mental health and psychiatric health. It's not a bad thing, but perhaps we can start saying behavioral health. Okay, how about sorry. So for our grant, our proposal, we talk about the need for behavioral health across, well, the United States, but also southern New Mexico, southwestern New Mexico. And that is the 4 counties of Grant, Hidalgo, Luna, and Sierra. And we certainly are short on providers, nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians, and others. Essentially, what we would like to do is incorporate behavioral health into our 4 nursing programs. How many people knew we had 4? Okay, all right, now we do. Yes, now you do. So we have both of our BSN, and we have an MSN fully online, and we're going to launch an FNP program. And so it's a good time for us to try to integrate behavioral health into this. So people are treating the body and the mind, and some would say the spirit as well, the whole person. So the BEPI model, you can read here, I took this, modified it from this paragraph here, and it goes on for a couple more pages. But the first part of this is the synthesis and finding a way to synthesize this into our nursing programs. And then expanding these capacities with our nurses, our nursing students, the programs, so that people understand what behavioral health is, what to do about it, and then increasing nurses, the workforce, and keeping them here in New Mexico. So, for instance, and nursing can correct me if I'm wrong, but our graduates, our BSN graduates, are all employed. We have 100% placement, not just in New Mexico, but they could go anywhere. Hopefully, most of them stay here. So we're going to keep them here. Why not educate them, provide them training in behavioral health? Because they're going to be here anyway, and they certainly would make a significant impact on this subject. All right, so you've seen this before. I'm just going to use it again. Without going into every single one of these, I mean, you can see it later if you want to, but without going into every single one, I wanted to focus on a few of these subheadings. So this is the narrative, and these things need to be in the narrative. So I'm somebody who looks at that, not so much the budget, and that's why I have help with that. Here you have targeting the need for behavioral health. Well, you can read this. We have, and thanks to Alexis, who found the most recent healthcare workforce for New Mexico, she found that report, and we had the statistics to justify why we need these services. Now, Ilia mentioned working with NMSU, and I'm glad that you said that, because we want to also nurture our relationship with NMSU as well. And we do have a history with one another. Now, this you can see here, having our FNP students go into, our graduates go into NMSU's Psych Mental Health Nurse Practitioner program, so we're still using the terms, and then they could become dual certified. And you saw, for instance, with Alexis, she has all these nurse practitioner credentials after her name. Somebody like this would be able to treat more than one type of individual, more than one system, more than one type of person, age group, etc. Another section of the narrative, educational and practice partnerships. This is one of the things, I'm biased, but nursing does very well. We are big on education and working together and clinical placements and clinical work. So once again, a very significant part of this team has been Alexis. Not only does Alexis know everybody, but she has those clinical connections that this grant would not have been possible with, this application, if we did not have her knowledge and her acquaintances. Then we have the work plan. Now the work plan was it was pretty intense. But what they want to know is, how are you going to measure this? So it's great to have all these ideas. I mean, ideas are fantastic, but you have to be able to measure them, at least in something like this. And we talk about these years 1, 2, and 3. We're very specific, and we even literally spelled it out: who, what, how, why, and therefore. The so what question. Maybe some of you students have heard the so what question, like, so what? Why does this matter? Why are we going to give you money? So what? What can you do with this money? So we called it therefore. And then if, we have a logic model. Again, it's several pages long. You're welcome to take a look if you care to. This rapid cycle quality improvement, or RCQI, is necessary. We want to have that with a project like this, with a large project like this. Well, any, actually. But it makes sense that we would not evaluate ourselves. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could give ourselves an evaluation? Maybe I'm not sure if we'd all give ourselves A's, but maybe so close to that. And we need somebody from the outside to evaluate us and say they're doing A work, or they could improve on this. So again, working with New Mexico State, building that relationship, establishing that relationship, not only with nursing, but with their research team, their evaluation team, Crimson. And I believe, I have to check, but I believe they call it Crimson because that's one of the colors of NMSU's set of colors. But bless you, and again, I have hand sanitizer. Probably that whole section has hand sanitizer. Yes, so they are written into the grant, and we have a letter of support from them saying we will do this if Western is funded. So it's nice to have that. And it's like a contract. So what they would do is go through. Crimson wrote the evaluation plan for us. We gave them data, and they wrote that for us. Now, little side note about data. I know some people say data is, and that's fine. It's colloquialism kind of thing. But data really are, because datum is singular. So just remember that, students and researchers. Okay, so now we wait. I don't know that we know when they'll make a decision, but it theoretically would be before July 1st, the start of the fiscal year. And the thing is, again, would it be nice to get this? Absolutely. So many people would benefit. People who have behavioral health issues, and any of us could have those at any time. We just don't know what is going to push us over that threshold. Hopefully nothing ever will, but it would be so helpful for people. Obviously the workforce, the nursing workforce, others who would be affected by that, the university, School of Nursing, our students, so many people would benefit. But if we don't get it, we just keep trying. At the same time, we are building upon the BEPI model for another grant, and Chris and Alexis and I are working on one from a private foundation. We don't have to go into that, but so play to win. Keep writing. You don't get it the first time, the second, the 10th, I don't know about the 10th, but you just want to keep doing this and working together. Everybody has different perspectives, different resources, access to resources, and together, teamwork makes the dream work. Okay, so do we have any questions?
Is there a contact at, I guess it would be is it BHSA or HSA? I can't remember the acronym right now.
HERSA, yes.
Who can help mentor you all a little with grant writing? I've heard that sometimes you're more likely to be awarded if you've got a little feedback as you go along. And I wondered if you have that.
Well, that's a really great point. We'll have to take that into consideration the next time. So who knew? This is when it's nice that a researcher shares that with, now we know, huh? So.
Some do and some don't, but some of the bigger nationally, federally funded do have support.
I'm going to look through this again. So, but I appreciate that, and we appreciate that. Okay, well, if there are no other questions.
So I've
Oh,
got
yes.
one.
Oh,
So when you received this grant, I saw that like for the benefit for students, you know, like dual certification, what other benefits would students see?
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for asking. We have quite a number of benefits that students would see. First of all, with a slight redesign of our curriculum, there's only so much we can do with the pre-licensure because we have a standardized curriculum across New Mexico for that, but we have what are called concepts and exemplars that would allow us to build in behavioral health. So some of those concepts are stress and coping, for instance. So it would make sense that behavioral health could fall into that concept. And then for students who are doing clinicals, especially at the FNP level, we would want to have some sort of stipend for the preceptors because it does take a preceptor, a nurse practitioner, a physician, slightly away from their routine. If they're used to seeing so many patients and they quote unquote slow down because they have a student, obviously they're helping with this. They're not opposed to it. But if we can sort of make up for some of the time that the billable hours that they've lost, that would be a nice relationship. And then just for our fully online students, our RN to BSN and our MSN, we would want to have webinars and whatnot. And then hopefully take all of this to the outside world for what are called continuing education units. For nurses, a lot of healthcare, well, for healthcare professionals, we need to keep up our education, and we do that with a certain number of credit hours. So we would do that. Okay, so there we have it. Oh, yes, thank you.
I understand that you've worked with NMSU before on other research projects. Do you find that, this may be a very ignorant question, but do you find it's a very collegial relationship, or is there competition, tension between the schools when you're doing something like this?
You're going there. That's okay. That's good. Okay, so okay.
I'm a social work student.
Well, and nurses and social work, we work very well together. So the thing about NMSU, when I say I worked with them before, I am biased again. I did go there. It's been about 20 years, but I was a student there. And then I interact with a lot of the nursing professors, as well as Alexa Doeg, the dean for the School of Nursing. And we've talked about different things. They can write, they write plenty of grants. I think they wrote 2 HERSA applications and they got 1 of them. So that's good, 50%. Well, and it's interesting you say that because our nursing programs, we are starting to do more and more research. And you know, every cohort of nursing people has a focus, whether they realize it or not. And ours is starting to become, we're going to add more research to it, not at the expense of teaching or our clinical education of our students, but in addition to. And so how do we want, so with NMSU, one of the nice things about having letters of support and writing certain people into the grant and whatnot is you have those boundaries. And we may want to trust everybody and believe the best, et cetera, but in nursing we say, if it wasn't documented, it wasn't done. And so as much as you can work with other people, that's fantastic, but there should be something in writing to some extent saying, New Mexico State would help with the enrollment of our qualified FNP graduates. So if they wanted to say, we didn't say that, which I doubt they would, but if they said we didn't say that, we have a letter of strong support actually saying, okay, we're going to work with them. And then the other thing, sometimes things go awry and you can backpedal, as they say, a little bit and still salvage a relationship. But sometimes it just doesn't work, and unfortunately you move forward knowing that. But if you can have a team of people whom you trust, they've proven themselves, and for us with New Mexico State, one of the things about getting this in, and there were a few bumps in the road, but we got it in, and the thing is, it shows New Mexico State that we didn't drop the ball. Even if we don't get this, our image to them would look like, right, they kind of are flaky or something, to use a term. And we don't want to appear that way to our professional colleagues and whatnot, whether they're here or somewhere else. So this gives us a chance. I mean, when I let Alexa, the dean, know that we got this in, she was so happy for us, even if we don't get the funding. Although I like Joe's philosophy when we do. But even if we don't. So yeah, I appreciate your candidness with that. It is a reality. It is a concern. Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
You want to get yourself going?
What? Okay.
Yeah, get it up.
I need it shorter. I think I might take it off. Does anybody want to stand up? Maybe stretch a little, shake your arms. Do what you got to do, you guys. It's been a little while that we've been sitting still. I know I could stand for that.
So while Dr. Johnston is preparing her PowerPoint here, I want to say if there are any other researchers here who would be interested in next season, I believe my grant funding will continue for this. So if there's anybody here who would like to participate in this Science Speaker Series next semester, let me know, please.
Okay, so along those lines, thank you, dear. Along those lines, I wanted to thank you for putting this on. I will, okay. That's my husband, so that's why I call him dear. I think I do sometimes call other students that. I apologize, but it's not just because he's super cute, but he is. But anyway, I'm Dr. Johnston, and thank you for inviting me. And I wanted to point out that some of the reason that we're doing Women in Research, I'm sure you might be aware, but March is Women's Month. We want to celebrate women, we want to think about what they're doing, and I appreciate that Western has put a focus on this. I hope you can check out the alumni edition of the Westerner that just came out. They've done an incredible story and spread of a number of women in research on campus, some that are here today, some that aren't, as well as other women on campus, the service they provide, the leadership that they provide, all kinds of neat things. So check that out. It's really a great edition of the Westerner. Okay, so I am a media psychologist, and I'm going to be sharing with you the most recent project that I've been working on, along with a student who was supported by SRPD funds. She is here today. That is Ms. Kim Austin. Thank you, Kim. I literally would not have any of the data that I need to talk to you about today if it weren't for Kim, so thank God. And so I'll mostly be sharing that project, but I do engage students in research wherever I can. I appreciate that you guys vote to have your student funds support each other in paying somewhat for your time with doing research, as well as supplies, travel, things like that. So we have a really kind of neat thing going at Western with SRPD, and thanks to those who started that, and in particular Dr. Coleman a number of years ago. Okay, my project that I've been doing almost a year now, it's a rather long title, I don't know if I love it, but now that they know, do newspapers refrain from spreading media contagion? We shall see. I'm learning this a little bit. Okay, there we go. So what is media contagion, first off? It is the idea that mass shooting could be contagious, that individuals who hear about it and think about it and maybe identify with someone who's done it will then start thinking they're going to do it too. We know that suicide is contagious, and we now know that mass shootings are contagious as well. We've had 10 individual studies looking at whether it's contagious in various ways. All 10 of them have found evidence of a contagion, and the contagion has a pretty consistent window. It's about between 2 and 14 days after the incident that's reported on that another incident is more likely to happen. In the like 25, when it comes to school shootings, 25% more likely to even 33% of a chance that there will be another mass shooting in a short period after one that is reported, especially one that is reported nationally, which many of them are anymore. Most media coverage, not surprisingly, lasts about 2 weeks after any given mass shooting, and then it tends to die off until the next one comes along. One of the major studies who used a virus spreading model, so they work normally with public health out of ASU, Dr. Towers' team, they look at mathematical models that track viruses and bacteria and how they spread, and they applied that to this same concept and found that when 3 shootings happen in succession, a 4th is guaranteed. That's how strong the contagion is. All right, so what's fueling this contagion? Well, I think a few things, and this is where my work starts coming in more. First of all, I believe that parasocial relationships play a role. In essence, a parasocial relationship is the relationship that we start having with characters and figures in the media. We all have a favorite character, or maybe a few that we think about, or a favorite actor, maybe a favorite role that they're in, a favorite show, and there's a character. And so we actually, as human beings, start subtly having a relationship with that person. They don't know us. They don't know that we're doing this, but we are doing it. And some people have a higher tendency to have parasocial relationships than others. But all of us, to some degree, start almost worrying about that character, thinking about them, feeling compassion for them, imagining what it's like to be in their shoes. These are the things we do in normal social relationships. And we also do it with mediated figures. So in the case of mass shootings, part of what I think is going on is that, for one, we will engage in parasocial relating more strongly if we believe it's a true story or a real story, which, of course, talking about a mass shooter and what they did in the news, generally people see that as highly realistic. It's real and happened, they believe it's true. And furthermore, if the media focuses on the shooter a lot and talks about their characteristics, what they shows images of them, what they look like, things they're interested in, maybe their weapon choices, things, you're providing kind of a big basis and story for the viewer to become curious about that person, but more so to maybe identify with them. So when we have would-be shooters, people who might share some of these qualities, watching that and then starting to identify, finding that person familiar and or similar to themselves, we believe it can create a situation where they see them as an ally. And when we have an ally, we're likely to step away from conformity. So normally we conform to the norms, the social norm, which is thou shalt not kill. We normally conform to that. But if we even have 1 or 2 other people who don't conform to that and we see ourselves as like them, we are more likely to violate a norm like that and step away and do something terrible like a mass shooting. That's part of it. The other piece I've been looking a lot at is narcissism. We see higher levels of narcissism in mass shooters. There seems to be kind of this trifecta: social isolation or a recent social blow to the esteem, suicidality, that's a big part of this, and then narcissism. You also have to blame others for your problems for this to kind of work out. And so in one of the studies that I did with some students last year, around spring this time, they found with us, we coded a number of newspaper articles and how journalists perceived and gathered information from various family members, friends, etc., for traits of narcissism. And we found at least 9% of those articles we randomly selected on 45 mass shooters contained a streak of narcissism. And that's just being reported in the news. That's not so much from their personal writings. We see it's even higher. One of my colleagues, Dr. Langford, found among the shooters he was able to access their personal materials, writings, etc., up to 20% of them are showing traits of narcissism. Suicidal depression, I mentioned. We already know suicide's contagious, so there's that factor that's playing into this contagion. And that the problem is they decide at some point not to just kill themselves, but to take people with them. And usually a group, someone they're blaming, or a kind of an archetype of something that they blame for a number of their problems, taking back some power, but becoming known for it in the process. If the media puts their image front and center on a newspaper or on a television program, we are giving them exactly what they want. So that's what we're looking at next with this project. So are they doing that, is the first question. We have a pretty good sense that they have been, and my question has been, has it been changing? So from 2000 to 2012, about 60% of, in this particular sample of newspaper headings, my colleague Dr. Schildkraut found that 60% focused on the shooter in the early days following particular shootings. Then another content analysis came along looking at imagery, so not headlines, the first one was headlines, imagery in mass shootings in newspapers again. They're a little easier to work with sometimes because you can get hold of these and track what's going on. Then sometimes a television program is a little harder to sample from television and other types of news programs. From 2007 to 2015, basically starting with the Virginia Tech, she looked at 3 major mass shootings in that time period: Virginia Tech, Umpqua Community College, and Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook. No, it's all right. I was just like looking at you for like moral support. I can do this. Sandy Hook. Those 3 in that time period, what she found was that victims were portrayed 16 times less often than their perpetrator. Okay, any one victim. Now, some of that is because there are multiple victims, but they're not showing like all the victims' faces and his face once. They're showing his face over and over and over, and the victims are getting much less. Sometimes it was more like 30 to 40 times more, depending on the shooting, but the average was about 16 times more often. They show the shooter than the victims. So what I wanted to do was reprise her study and utilize her methodology. This is my colleague, Dr. Dahman, out of the University of Oregon, and she gave me permission to do this. And so I picked up from the time that our research on Don't Name Them, Don't Show Them, and on media contagion has been widely in the media. As many of you know, I've been interviewed more than 100 times by all over the world, really, regarding this theory and what's going on. The media is interested. They do seem to care when you talk to them, and they're worried. They don't want to be part of the problem. But at this, and then my colleagues have been interviewed another hundreds of times on top of that. So I started to wonder, is this even working? Are they changing these practices or not? So that's what this is about. So here's our hypothesis, that we will find no difference. Sadly, I wasn't feeling very positive about it. That from 2017 to 2019, that gave at least a full year of this research being out there, and with 2 of the shootings, it's given 2 or 3 years of the research being out there and talked about vastly in the media. Will we see a difference in the number of images of perpetrator and the relative size of images compared to those to victims? So I want to compare to what Dahman found. Our second hypothesis, and this is new, that she didn't code for how many times the shooter's name was used on the front page of the newspaper, but we did code for that. So we feel that we would find a majority, say 75% or more of the papers using the shooter's name, which is what we've asked them not to do, not to use their image, not to use their name. Tell everything else about the story that you want to tell. Okay, so we collected through a friend, another colleague in South Carolina, who has algorithms to kind of collect front pages of newspapers, and we worked in a digital format for this. Between some of the days after the shooting, there were only 462 front pages available because some of the papers only do, say, a weekend edition, something like that, up to the most that we had was 603 front pages of newspapers. We coded for 9 days, so the first 3 days following 3 major shootings. The 3 major shootings were Las Vegas, Nevada, Santa Fe, Texas high school shooting, and Parkland, Florida high school shooting. We did 2 school shootings, and one was just known as a mass shooting, somewhat to replicate what Dr. Dahman did. She did all 3 school shootings, but we really felt we wanted to look at the Las Vegas shooting for a number of reasons, and be able to maybe compare a little between school and other mass shootings, which she wasn't able to do. These are the types of codes that we did. We're only about halfway through, so I have multiple dates to be able to compare some of it, but we've done 5,000 images, most of which by Kim. Thank you, Kim. And so we code the state, the date, the shooter name if it's used, the number of times, which I add in that part that the shooter's name was used, and I'll show you a little how this works and what it looks like, and the photo size and the photo frame. Ah, there's the typo. I knew I'd find one eventually. Photo frame, not fram. Okay, so this is what a typical And I do apologize, some of these, of course, are quite emotional images, not necessarily gory or anything like that, but be aware that the images are intensely emotional, most of them. I wanted to show you, so from Las Vegas, this is what we might see when we are coding a front page. And we did it in this format. In fact, first we would zoom in 2 times so that we had a similar sizing issue. I would search for the shooter's name and find out that, say, on the Los Angeles Times, it was used 5 times, his name. Then we look at whether this story is a lead or a secondary story, meaning, and this is from my journalism and communications colleagues, because it's not something I usually do or study, but in the first half of the paper is known as the lead story. So, you know, where the paper folds in half, whatever's on the front half of that fold versus the bottom half of that fold. And so this image we would code, we'll be chatting more about exactly how we did this, but that some of the image is showing and it's related to the headline, so that would be a lead story image. And also on a laptop it doesn't appear quite the same as it does on the screen that we use to do this. So this would be the image that we would see. We would code this as large, and we had measurements for that. And then we would code what the subject matter is. And when you look a little bit, they're carrying a victim who's injured to safety. And so that would be a victim at the scene of the crime, either dead, injured, or being rescued. So that's how that frame gets coded. There are more images, so we code every image on the front page, which is also why there are so many to do, because there are many per front page. Often we have a vigil that we might code here, and I would code this one as scene of the crime. We have 2 coders, and we're checking kind of the subjectivity by doing intercoder reliability, and I'll report to you on that in a moment. Let me show you a front page from, say, New Mexico that same day, October 3rd, 2017 is what this looks like. From the Las Cruces Sun News. And so this is the image that they portrayed. And you'll see them with like shoes abandoned. You know something's bad when someone leaves their shoes behind. Oh, that's the Silver City Press. And actually this image is related to the shooting. This is the domestic violence shelter that's recognizing victims that have been killed in a crime, in a violent crime, and doing kind of a prayer and vigil for them that day. All right, then I would like to show you what the New York Times presented. This one is from Parkland, I believe. Is that May? Does that sound right? No, May. That was February 14th, right? So this is Santa Fe High School. And so as you can see here, the difference, they're not doing a lead story, but they did show victims at the bottom, and it's a secondary story. Okay, there's a difference there. However, they did use the shooter's name a number of times, I think on this one. So we're looking at all of those things. All right, lastly, I will show you the Parkland, Florida high school shooting. All right. It's not the easiest coding to do. I play the Beatles. You listen about podcasts the best that we can while we're going through it all. All right, so as far as our intercoder reliability, oh, wait, I wanted to show you, did I do that? Yeah, I did that, okay. What I found is that, luckily, we are lining up really well. The average reliability coefficient between the different codes that we were both using was about 90%, and you want it to be at least 80% or higher. I know, right? She didn't know this yet. But there is an issue, and so one of the things that what I'm gonna do when I'm finishing my coding is adjust something probably, because when I check one of our days against each other, which is more than 1,000 images, what I found is that you can see Kramer's V tells us how often we were different, is basically, so what percent of the time. So if you see a 0.04 in that first one, that's good. That means we were 96% of the time the same, only 4% different in that area of just the state. You'd think we could get the state right, but actually what it is that sometimes I missed images. So it looked like I'm saying something's California, she's moved on to Colorado, but it said I've missed something that was a teaser or a smaller image or something, or she's missed one. So anyway, that's kind of what that's about. And then we have a very high reliability between whether the shooter's name is there or not. The photo importance, we have about 86% overlap in reliability, but our issue is in the framing of deciding what the image is, which isn't surprising. Occasionally, that one with people running could have been coded as survivors escaping the scene. It kind of looks like that, but it could also be coded as victims being injured or something or carried. So that's probably where that comes from, and we'll look at that and see if we can line it up. The other thing is whether it was lead or secondary. Sometimes we were off a little bit with each other on that. Okay, so just a little lesson in intercoder reliability, if anyone cares. Okay, let me get back to, I like the bigger screen here. How do I do that again from the beginning? That's fine. Okay, so what did we find compared to Dr. Dahman? This is maybe the important slide to focus on. And I colored these in a sense, black indicating really there was no change. That from her 3 shootings that she looked at, the percent of shooters is on the left, and then the victims is in the parentheses next to it. So the percent of shooters on the front page, just if they're even, their image is on there at all. We were hoping to see that really go down, but actually it has gone down just a little. You can see from 14% to 10%. It may not be statistically significant. I still have to kind of search into that and make sure, but it's not very much. And you can see almost identical amounts of victims are still being portrayed on the front page versus now versus a few years back. What I have in red there is the concern to me. Even though that looks vastly different, it's the difference between the two that really matters, and that's not different at all. So the percent of shooters in the lead story, the first thing that your eye sees, is back in that time, it was about 66%, but you were also seeing victims 88% of the time in that lead story. Now, we're seeing a little bit less of, and there's an artifact here that I can explain a little bit why it's looking lower, but we're seeing about 12% of the time the shooter is still up there and 33%, and so that difference between them is very similar. Probably the artifact has a bit to do with the Las Vegas shooting in particular, which had in many times about 30% more imagery in general on front pages than the other 2 shootings. And so that's inflating the fact that they didn't have a lot of information yet in day 1 and day 2 about specific victims. So almost all of the imagery, because it was sort of mad chaos trying to figure out who had been killed or not, almost all of the imagery is like survivors escaping or unknown victims or law enforcement scene of the crime memorials. So that's kind of where that difference between the top and bottom as far as amount comes from. Yes? Right, you're right, absolutely. That's kind of what I mean, is that at the schools, the parents often know very quickly if their child has been killed, and so that gets to the press rather quickly that day or the next day, whereas with Las Vegas, it seemed to take more time. Or maybe because there were so many victims, 59 were killed, and many, many injured, that they chose to show different imagery than any one individual face. But there are victim images. They do, each state pulls out people that were killed from their state, and they will do a story on them. So it's kind of a mix of answers here. We're going to have to look at that a little bit more. But I am cautiously optimistic about the yellow, so that's why it's yellow, that we're seeing a slight decrease in shooters in secondary stories, so a little fewer of them. And we're seeing more victims in secondary stories. So that I like seeing. And I'm most happy, I guess, about the last one, which is partly why my hypothesis 1 is wrong, which is good. That's good news. That we're seeing very few large photos of shooters. It used to be that there would be his face like taking up the whole front half of that page. And now we're mostly seeing mug shots and sometimes small, which is like it has to be 2 inches by 3 inches or a little bit bigger. So we're seeing a lot less of large photos of shooters and more large photos of victims. So we're happy about that. I don't know where my time is at all. I better hurry. Okay, nearly there. These numbers are a little harder to see. This one is the new piece related to hypothesis 2, whether at least the top half and then the bottom half relates to what we were just talking about. Let me start with the bottom half then. So basically, I also wanted to look, is there a relationship then between using the shooter and that size of the image? And yes, there's a trend that indicates, in this case, you want to see the opposite of what we saw with chi-square and reliability coefficient, where you want the 2 samples to be dependent. Here we want them to be independent to say there is a relationship. And so basically, we are seeing that there's a trend of smaller photos with shooters, is what this indicates. It's a moderate size. Kramer's V indicates the size or the importance of that trend. It's moderate. And I'm happy with all of those. That shows something. And victim photo importance, we're seeing more lead stories versus secondary. That's a good trend, I believe. And then with photo size, we see that same trend, that they're trending toward smaller photos, and the victims are trending toward larger photos. So the other numbers have to do with how many times the name was printed. Sometimes many of the papers chose not to print the name at all or the image. And so we have about 33% of the time, the first day after the shooting, not reporting the name at all. That, I think, is encouraging, but it's still a majority that are. So 2/3 of the papers are reporting the name, and as you can see, some are reporting it 5, 6, and 10 and more times. The highest number I found was 19. 19 times his name was on the front page, just the front page, not to mention the articles in the back of the paper. And the thing that's a little concerning to me about that, here's kind of our last conclusions related to this, many of which I've said. So it's good news that hypothesis 1 was incorrect. The size of images of perpetrators has gone down, the size of images of victims has gone up. We're also seeing a little more of a trend of secondary stories for perpetrators, whereas primary or lead stories for victims. The bad news is that we're still seeing about the same number of total images of perpetrators. They're finding a way to put them on there somewhere. Maybe just a little smaller, maybe a little lower, but they're not wanting to give up this practice of don't show the shooter. What else? And about 2/3 of the front pages still print the perpetrator's name, and 22% of them are saying it 5 or more times. The thing that I almost found the most disturbing, and I want now is kind of part 2, I want to dig into a little more, is that the largest circulation papers are the ones that are using the name the most. So I'm finding like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, the big papers in each city, the Dallas Sentinel, or I can't remember what it's called, the Chicago Tribune. These big papers are using the name of the shooter more than the little smaller papers in surrounding areas. I assume it's because they think it will get them more readers, and they feel more pressure to feed into their subscriptions and keep that readership high. So I'm not totally sure about that, but why that's happening, but that's what we're seeing. And we want them to be the leaders. People look to the Washington Post and the Times for how to handle this, and if they're using it more than anyone, that's a concern for me. But you know, I'll call them out when I get my chance. All right, any questions, I guess? Yes, Roberta.
Have you talked to anyone at the Washington Post or the New York Times about why they continue to do this, and what was their response?
So I don't know if I think I've talked to the Post, not the Times myself. A couple of my colleagues have multiple times been interviewed. I mean, entire stories about this topic and information about contagion, and they continue to do it. Television news stations have said, various producers are saying that that's what the people want. That our readership goes up, that we have more eyes glued to the screen, that more people buy the paper, and they buy it maybe in successive days when there's a major tragedy like this going on, and they want all that detail, and they want to know, why did he do it? We need to understand him. We need to dig into who he is, like as readers. That's kind of what they're saying. And somehow, I mean, obviously, shootings are just increasing, so the more that we know about the shooter as the public, the less that we're getting better at preventing this. For researchers, yes, we need to be able to have access to some of that detailed information, and the FBI needs to, but we argue that it's not helping anything, and in fact, you're probably triggering that next would-be shooter to identify with them and want to do it too. But they say that it's very much about readership, and that people will watch longer, watch again the next day, keep checking in, buy papers if they focus on the shooter quite a bit. My answer, I believe psychologically, I'm not totally sure about this, but my speculation is that people are much more comfortable with outrage than sadness. And when you see victims, you feel really sad, and that's where you kind of stay. But it's a lot easier to be mad and to be outraged. And if you see shooters, then you kind of feel more outraged. Yeah.
Have they even tried, like, I know you said that that's what the public wants, which it's not true. We know that now as a society.
Well, I hope it is on some of you guys to not click, to not watch, to, avoid that kind of stuff.
So my question is, have anybody proposed to them, okay, you say that this is what the public wants, have you made any changes completely
Mhm.
about 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, 3-month period in
Good
a year?
question.
And have you checked on your finances to see if you do
Good
get
point.
accepted or not? Does it
I like
affect
that.
you?
Yeah, thank you. I will use that. Thank you. What I'm thinking, part of it was I felt like I couldn't go to them with more concern unless I proved whether they were doing a better job or not. So that's a big purpose of this study, was to be able to talk to the media about, like, now we know. Now we have 2 excellent studies over time looking at whether this is changing or not. And now you can look, if you are reporting it less, how's it going for your business? You know, are you able to still maintain those levels of readership that you hope? So that's a great idea, and I hope that's what we can do, is once this is finished and published, we can have that conversation with them now. I know you can, but it's for YouTube. They can't hear even when you talk loud.
I was just wondering, because of the subject of your research, if you've attracted any trolls.
Oh, and don't give them ideas. I mean, Joe and I talked about it. We were a little worried in ways, but no, nothing so far. It's more like I had to deal a bit with, wow, I'm going to get a phone call now every time something horrible happens, and I have to kind of process how I feel about it and then have to immediately start talking to others about it. That has been hard, although it's happening less, so I'm glad. Not that shootings are going down. We're at an average, like 2019, of 28 per year, which is at least 3 times more than it was 10 or 15 years ago. But no, so far so good. Yeah. I do get, plenty of emails and just people interested in wanting to talk, but overwhelmingly they're concerned and they're upset and what can they do, and they're so glad that we're doing the research and putting it out there. Well, thank you all. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for coming to all of this.
Well, thank you all for attending the 3rd installment of this year's Science Speaker Series. We'll be continuing again next semester, so keep an eye out. If there are any researchers who would like to participate with this in the future, please contact me. Thank you.